6. All right. One last time. Everyone's all good. No one's not ready. Cool. Grant and I negate. Contention 1 is ending ISIS once and for all. Magid 2 weeks ago, foreign policy writes that with coronavirus causing chaos in Iraq, the Islamic State, which has once been on the back foot for years, is now eager to move into this power vacuum. Luckily, the United States helps fight ISIS in 2 ways. First is by creating stability. Carafella 19 of the ISW explains that currently, areas ISIS has lost in Iraq and Syria are neither stable nor secure. Importantly, ENT17 of the CSAF finds that the only way ISIS emerged in the past was by capitalizing on the chaos in Syria and by the weak central authority in Iraq. However, U.S. presence fixes this problem, as COP18 of the Military Times explains that U.S. and coalition forces are involved in stabilization efforts, including resettling displaced Iraqi civilians and getting civilian infrastructure back up and running again in cities that were devastated by ISIS. Branch 15 of the Strategic Studies Institute continues that because withdrawal prevents these efforts, removal of American forces from a still unstable context could undercut any previous counterterrorism gains and facilitate the instability in which jihadist organizations thrive. Second is by training Iraqi forces. Nowak of the Washington Post writes in January that American training and funding is responsible for the country's only counterterrorism force that is largely uncorrupt. However, if the United States withdraws a troop from Iraq, the governmental counterterrorism force would likely merge with Iranian-backed militias, which would undermine their reputation and constitute a large blow to the Iraqi state. Felsher 20 Politico corroborates that when the US left Iraq in 2011, the Iraqi military quickly deteriorated to the point where the Islamic State could grow in our absence. For these reasons, Carafella concludes that when ISIS seeks to reestablish territorial control in Iraq, it will likely succeed if the United States withdraws. The impact is refugees. Reed 19 of World Vision writes that primarily because large-scale military conflict has died down, to date, more than 4 million people have returned to their homes in Iraq as a result of ending hostilities. Unfortunately, they further that 1.6 million people still remain displaced and are in need of humanitarian aid with poor living conditions. Contention 2 is stopping yet another Middle Eastern war. Currently, Israel and Iran are sworn enemies, with Smith 19 of NBC News noting that Israel views Tehran as an existential threat. Luckily, U.S. presence in the region has thus far kept Israel at bay, but affirming reverses 2 warrants. First is nuclearization. Etzioni 19, professor at George Washington University, writes that if Iran faces no reaction to its provocations, it will expand its nuclear program, since Tehran believes that nukes are the best guarantee for its national security and act as a proactive shield. This would be disastrous, as Farley 19 of the National Interest writes that if Iran appeared to be on the verge of nuclear weapons, Israel might well consider a preemptive nuclear attack, as Israeli planners would no longer deem a conventional strike sufficiently lethal to destroy or delay the program. Second is abandonment. Harel 19 of Haaretz warns that Israel is scared by America's apparent desire to quit the region, which would leave Iran with more room to maneuver. Horowitz 19 for the Times of Israel corroborates that the concern in Israel is that America's hands-off approach will encourage the Iranians to act against the country. This is harmful, as Horshik 19 of the Conversation writes that Israel is known to take aggressive and preventative action to protect itself, including by launching preemptive strikes on neighboring nations it views as threatening. If international relations with Iran grow more volatile, Israel could take dramatic unilateral action, which she concludes Iran would surely retaliate against and trigger a region-wide conflict that spirals throughout the entirety of the Middle East. This would be disastrous and lead to war, as Oren 19 of the Atlantic finds that the conflagration could be ignited by just a single spark, and after a day of large-scale exchanges, the real war would begin, with the number of rockets raining down in Israel totaling 4,000 per day. Faced with thousands of casualties, Israel would surely deploy some of its nuclear arsenal to end the war quickly. Disastrously, TERS 13 of Mother Jones finds that such a strike would kill an estimated 5.6 million people and injure 1.6 million more. To save lives, negate.
Can we see a couple of cards? First, can we see the impact evidence for kills 5 million people? And if you could have like full context with that card, that'd be great too. And then secondly, can we see the Horowitz evidence?
I have Terse. The second one was Horowitz.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Hate to interrupt, but could Ellie Singer go to room 202 to judge?
I sent both. In the case, we read it word for word because we don't paraphrase. So that's probably sufficient, but.
Okay, cool. It hasn't come through for me yet, but I'll take some prep when I receive it. It doesn't come through for me. Are you sure you hit reply all? Because we had that happen.
Yeah, I'm certain.
Okay, it's just probably slow down. Morgan, have you gotten it? Morgan.
Chain came through for me. I'll check address spellings, but it should have just been reply all.
I mean, I had the original email chain email, so I have, like, you got my email address right. It just has yet to come in.
Yeah, I have it too. It might just be the internet or processing.
Yeah.
You could also check spam because it's from a Hawken domain.
Okay. It's not in spam.
I think we both have
Morgan.
Original. Yeah. What?
Morgan, if you got it, do you want to forward it to me?
Yeah, I don't have it. I have the original test email that was sent, but didn't have any, like.
Yeah, I have that too. I don't have anything else.
I would refresh your email. Because I just did that and it worked.
Okay. Did that.
And I see your emails on it, so you should get it.
Okay. That's...
Got it. Came through for me.
Wait, why do I still not have this?
I emailed the case as a document, so maybe that's why it's taking longer, but.
Try
oh, okay. It just showed up. It just showed up. Okay, perfect. All right, I'm good. I'll take some prep.
Really quick before you take prep.
Yeah.
If this becomes an ongoing issue that's going to delay the round, one thing that you all can also do is just start a shared Google Doc and paste things in it if this becomes an issue that eats up more prep than prep.
Okay.
Sure. Okay.
Do what you're doing normally now, but if it's an issue after the next speech too, we can do that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, I'll take some prep starting now. We got 15 seconds used.
Okay, is everyone ready? If I doubt it's going to happen, if my tech shorts out, just unmute yourself and just clear me. I'll slow down. I'm not going to spread or anything. Don't worry about it. I just don't know what the tech is going to be like, so it'll be good. Just clear me if you can't hear me. Is everyone ready? Contention 1 is Yemen. Hasbin 19 explains that benefiting from the U.S. security umbrella anchored by its bases around the Gulf, Saudi Arabia and the UAE have attempted to organize the region through military interventions. They launched, with U.S. support, an ineffective war against the Houthi rebels in Yemen. After America withdraws troops from the Gulf, Saudi Arabia no longer has the security umbrella that enables its adventurism into Yemen, which will cause them to turn to a negotiated solution to the conflict. As current conditions are ripe for an agreement, Hanley of March 2020 explains that the war has been costly both in financial terms and in the international reputation of Saudi Arabia. The Saudis would agree to having the Houthis share in power with the Saudi-supported Hadi government. This is true empirically, Parsi 2020. Recognizing that the U.S. military was no longer at their disposal, Saudi Arabia began exercising their diplomatic options. They stepped up direct talks with Houthi rebels. The level of violence declined as a result, with an 80% reduction in Saudi-led airstrikes. A power sharing agreement is critical. Wiesman 18. The fighting in the blockade in particular has disrupted imports of food, fuel, and medical supplies. Indeed, Landry in 2020 continues that the UN has described Yemen as the world's worst humanitarian emergency, with 10 million people on the brink of famine. Contention 2 is drones. Tourist in 2011 explains that the Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar is critical to drone wars in both Afghanistan and Pakistan. U.S. drones draw the U.S. into a conflict with Afghanistan for 2 reasons. First is direct escalation. Drones risk escalation crises from miscalculation and entanglement, which triggers war in Afghanistan. Schaus 2018. Low cost and ease of use suggest proliferation of UAS drone capabilities will continue. The gap between signal interpretation and the interpretation of that signal leaves room for consequences. 2 is angering foreign powers. Drone strikes withdrawing in other powers cause war in Afghanistan as well as with China and Russia. Cronin 13. The problem is the guidelines for how Washington uses drones have fallen well behind. The U.S. risk encouraging China, Iran, and Russia to label their own enemies as terrorists and go after them across borders. If that happens, counterterrorism by drone strikes ends up leading to globally destabilizing interstate wars. The impact is direct conflict. The U.S. is on the verge of being pulled into Afghanistan right now. Davis 20. We must quickly withdraw our troops before the Kabul completely breaks down and troops get caught in a civil war. The Taliban does not recognize the Afghan government as having authority. With chaos now, there's no chance the Taliban will negotiate. Trump will nuke Afghanistan. Tourist 2020. Trump's plans include numbers of dead, which means 20 million more, or more Afghans, all of them civilians. Trump does have the authority to launch weapons from his nuclear arsenal. Such would constitute a genocide. Afghanistan will be wiped off the face of the earth, as the president remarked. The death toll will exceed the Holocaust, the Rwandan genocide, and the Vietnam War, and the Korean War all combined. Contention 3 is the U.S.-Iran war. Aggressive foreign policy has put America and Iran on a collision course. Coronavirus is making the war in the Middle East even more likely. Germanos from April. Donald Trump threatened to attack Iran and make the country pay a heavy price. With the global pandemic and economic collapse, Trump wants to add a major war into the mix. K in 2020 continues. Some in the administration seek to use the COVID-19 crisis to capitalize on Iran's increased vulnerability. Withdrawing troops from Iran's backyard reduces the probability of U.S.-Iran war for 2 reasons. First is provoking Iran. Continued military presence risks miscalculation and provocation of Iran. Abido 20. U.S. fears of an imminent large-scale attack on its soldiers in Iraq is entirely valid. Iran seems ready to do whatever it takes to drive American troops out of the country immediately. The escalation by U.S. troops and the Iran-backed militias is putting Iraq at a risk of an all-out military conflict. This trims down the possible scenarios for the U.S. future in Iraq to only 2: all-out war or departure sooner rather than later. Absent U.S. threat of invasion, Iran will cease its escalatory actions. Trevino 13. While Iran is supported as exporting Islamic revolution, these actions do not create a network for offensive capabilities to become a hegemon. Instead, the focus of the new regime is on survival, not expansion. Second is a shift to diplomacy. America's approach to Iran has been overwhelmingly informed by aggression. Jones 11 confirms the challenge has for too long been treated almost entirely through the lens of security and militarism. Withdrawing troops sends a signal the U.S. will shift to diplomacy, breaking the cycle of escalation. Hard 19. Peaceful coexistence requires the will to talk and compromise. If either party shows reluctance, the region will continue to live with the possibility of a war that could make all past wars look minor in comparison. A U.S.-Iran war would be devastating. It would cause, according to Chusodowski in 2018, a nuclear holocaust over a large part of the Middle East and Central Asia involving millions of civilian casualties. Even if nuclear weapons are not used, the bombing of Iran's nuclear facilities using conventional weapons would contribute to unleashing a disaster with extensive radioactive fallout.
So Mev, I wanted to call the first card in drones about the critical base. The first card and the second warrant for that about letting China and Pakistan normalize bombing people.
Zane, if they're just sending their case, they probably read a carded case, so we don't.
Yeah,
we just wait for it.
It is.
Our case is just a bunch of cards down.
Cool.
Yeah, so we'll just wait for that to come in, and then we'll do cross.
Can we take prep before cross?
Sure.
Cool. But like waiting for the email first.
Yeah, I just sent it, so let me know when it comes through.
Just got an email from Morgan, captain the Blake School speech and debate president of the Blake School.
Yes, that is me.
That's him. That's the man.
Hawken, you got it?
Yeah, I haven't gotten it either. After this comes through, should we just do the Google Doc thing? Because this is taking like...
Yeah.
And we can just set up the Google Doc now while we wait.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do that. Oh, I think it just came through, actually. Yeah.
It might still be a good idea to do it. If you do, just make sure you include the judges' emails on that doc.
Yeah.
Sure. Who's going to do that?
I can do it.
Okay.
Okay, perfect.
All right, I just got the Google Doc.
Yeah, I just sent it out. It should be good.
Did the case ever end up coming through?
Yeah, I still haven't gotten it either. It's kind of...
Yeah, the case is a Word doc, so I feel like we should do that on email after both of the cases are sent in to the Google Doc.
Yeah.
So we'll just... So are you guys running prep?
No, we're just... Zane wasn't shared on the Google Doc.
Oh.
I was complaining that he's bad at like tech.
Wait, so is this doc created or?
Yeah. Did you?
I sent the Google Doc.
Oh yeah, I just got it. Cool.
All right, cool.
Are y'all prepping or is it?
No, we still haven't gotten the...
If you could just paste your case there, it's probably fine.
Oh shoot. Yeah. Okay. Morgan, do you want to do that?
Yeah, we'll try that. Should be fine.
What would be cool is if there was some kind of website where, like, before the round, people could post their cases for online tournaments.
Yeah.
That way,
Morgan, are you having trouble pasting? I
It
can do
just
that
came.
right now if you
It
want.
just came through on, so I think it's good
It just
on the
got-
Google Doc.
Oh,
So I think
yeah.
just start cross now.
All right, we're ready for cross.
All right.
Okay.
Cool, cool.
Okay, everyone good? Cool. On your Parsi evidence, you say that without the United States presence, Saudi Arabia stepped up talks, right?
Yeah, it was the threat of U.S. withdrawal. Yeah.
Was it the threat of the U.S. withdrawal, or was it Saudi Arabia feeling insecure about U.S. security commitments?
That's the same thing.
No, it's not. No, it's not. So for example, Saudi Arabia could feel like the US isn't going to protect it if they were attacked, but also have troops within the country, right?
The Parsi evidence is about a withdrawal of troops. It's about them being scared that the US was going to withdraw troops.
So let's talk about the timeline then. Why are they scared about withdrawing troops if the US didn't talk about that until much later?
You just asked a question I'm going to ask one now.
Sure.
So on your ISIS contention, your first link, your CFAF evidence says that ISIS expands by capitalizing on the chaos in Syria, for example, and on like weak governments in like Iraq. So does that mean that conflict or like instability in the region controls the internal link into ISIS?
Yeah, but it's also the other way around. So for example, what terrorist groups do is they destabilize government. That way they can help with recruitment efforts, and from there, like proxy war start and things like that.
You don't read evidence in your case that says that happens. That
Yeah, I know. I'm just a hunch. Can I get a question? Can I get a question?
Sure.
On your case, you give me evidence from Abalco or something that says that Iran wants to drive out U.S. troops, right?
Abido. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you say that that's their like how important is that to them?
The Abido evidence indicates that the United States presence in Iraq poses an existential threat to Iran. It says that they will do anything.
So like, how important is an existential threat though, realistically?
Well, first of all, you also qualified something as an existential threat.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm just like clarifying. How important is that card?
The quote from the card says that the Iran will do anything that it can to expel U.S. troops from Iraq.
Okay, cool.
So
we'll concede that. You can get a question.
Let's talk about your second contention, your Iran nuclearization argument. So, how does Iran have the money to expand their nuclear program?
How do they have the money to?
Yeah.
I don't know what you mean. They still sell some oil. Like oil revenue is down by half, but that doesn't mean it's zero.
Right. So given the fact that the United States sanctions are crippling Iran's economy, and the fact that coronavirus is also like a 1-2 punch, also crippling Iran's economy by like 25%. Where does Iran get the money to fund their nuclear program? Like how do
in
they
the SQO? They don't. We'll concede Iran's not nuclearizing. Can we get a question?
Wait. I mean like post.
Your question? What?
I mean post-AF, right? Like if Iran doesn't have the money, they don't have the money to do it either way, right?
We disagree. So the Corona stuff is probably damning in the short term, but realistically, like their economy is not going to tank like permanently as a result.
Well, one, we would disagree with that, but second of all, that doesn't take into account the sanctions, right?
No. But sanctions are only crippling their economy by like half of oil revenue, which isn't everything.
Well, if that's true, then why haven't it like clearly?
We're 10 seconds over.
Oh, are we? Okay, sorry.
Okay, we're gonna take a little bit of prep. So we'll start whenever Zane gets his time. All right, we're good.
That was 105, by the way.
Okay, so it's gonna be, yeah, it's just gonna be straight down case, nothing too fancy. Okay. Is everyone good? All right, cool. Start on their first contention on Yemen. 3 responses. First, The Economist yesterday finds that Saudi Arabia is already looking to withdraw from Yemen. That's really important because that means their entire contention is non-unique. Importantly, it finds that right now Saudi Arabia is uniquely losing the war, which is why they're trying to use coronavirus as a fig leaf to get out of the war. That's really important. There's no reason to vote for them. Yemen war is ending anyway. Secondly, we would say they never explained to you why like U.S. support through things like arms sales and logistical support doesn't actually continue triggering like Saudi or aggression and allowing them to keep fighting in Yemen. We would say it does. Lastly, Mara of The Guardian finds that the United Kingdom fills like very, very similar roles to what the United States does in terms of helping Saudi Arabia fight in Yemen. The reason that's important is because we would say that one, if what they're doing, or one, like the evidence is pretty explicit on like what they're doing now is probably good enough to keep continuing the war. But two, if it isn't, we would just say when the US pulls out, like the UK fills in and does more support. Lastly, on their Parsi evidence where they say like that their argument is empirically true, that's just not true because during the same time that Parsi talks about, the United States increased troops in the region. Go to their second contention about drones. Mainly, the only thing that matters is when they talk about like Qatar being crucial, like this Qatar base being crucial to Afghanistan. It literally makes no sense. The United States has 4 bases in Afghanistan anyway that are exclusive for drones. The reason that's important is because we'll just say we'll just use these bases instead of the one in Qatar. They never even explain why the one in Qatar is important. Second, DW finds that Reaper drones, which are like the ones we use, have a 1,000-mile distance. The reason that's important is because it means that literally Qatar being important makes no sense because one, we can use Afghanistan, but two, we can use other bases like Turkey, like bases in Turkey. We have drone bases everywhere. Lastly, the Wall Street Journal 17 finds that the CIA has a ton of drone bases. The reason that's important is because the CIA isn't the military, so we'll just turn to CIA drone strikes instead of military drone strikes. This means you actually turn it because the Wall Street Journal continues that the CIA has no oversight, which means that there'll probably be more civilian casualties when you vote for them. On their like link scenario, this literally makes no sense. We've been doing drone strikes like since the Obama administration. If any of their argument was true, like we'd probably be in war right now. Go to their third contention where they talk about US-Iran war. First, on like the uniqueness on their first warrant that like we're provoking them now, that's not true. Cooper 20 finds that right now the Trump administration has no appetite for war. But second, even if we do, it doesn't matter because we only retaliate against Iran. We don't actually retaliate against Iran specifically because we can never prove that like the attacks done by Iranian militias come from Iran. But third, even when we do retaliate, it's not actually lethal, so it probably doesn't cause escalation because like the one example of retaliation was against like Iranian militias. We just took out 5 militias depots at night to avoid civilian casualties. But lastly, even if we do attack them and like there's a lethal strike, it doesn't start a war because Hard 20 finds that it's possible to use lethal force to actually lower tensions. The reason is because it creates red line violations that shows the other person where not to cross, concluding that you can lower tensions with lethal strikes. On their second contention, where they talk about diplomacy, the most important thing is that second warrant, where they talk about diplomacy, the most important thing is that this type of diplomacy is never going to happen. The reason because Mackenzie 19 of CNN finds that fundamentally that Iran will only negotiate if they remove sanctions, but Opersco 19 of Politico finds that Trump's already taken that off the table. At that point, our world's better. The reason is because when you vote for them, Iran will expand into Iraq. Detmer 20 VOA explains that Iran views control over Iraq is critical to their survival as Iraq serves as an economic lung that can alleviate the impact of sanctions and a crucial logistical supply link that links Iran to the Assad region and Hezbollah. For this reason, Iran will never give up on fighting for Iraq. Voting pro ensures Iran controls Iraq. Middle 19 of the Military Times explains the U.S. must maintain military presence in Iraq in order to counter Iranian influence. Importantly, for this reason, Jihad 20 War in Iraq explains that a U.S. withdrawal would allow Iran to gain increasingly vast amounts of influence in Iraq. This would be bad for 2 reasons. First, Jihad continues that increased Iranian influence would lead American hawks to treat Iraq as an enemy and push Trump to sanction Iraq. This would be devastating. Court Writer 1 of The Nation finds that sanctions on Iraq in the 90s resulted in the deaths of nearly 227,000 children. Second, Constable 20 of the Miami Herald writes that the so-called Shiite crescent stretching from Iran through Iraq to the Levant would be brought closer to reality. If Iran could maintain a foothold in Iraq, the establishment of the Shiite crescent would be devastating for regional stability. Wehi 17 of Oxford University writes that it would challenge the status quo pro-Western Sunni dominance in the Middle East and could have a cascading effect into the region. Shia-Sunni tensions could reemerge, which would propel the possibility of a Shia-Sunni conflict even more. This would be devastating, as Kedar of INN writes. The ongoing political wars between Sunni and Shia still cause many thousands of deaths, and the 8-year war between Iraq and Iran resulted in well over 1 million. Lastly, Shia crescent short circuits all of their offense because if there's like a war between Saudi Arabia and Iran because of it, it also brings in the United States because like we'd back them up.
Okay. Can we see the expansion into Iraq causes Shia crescent also hopefully full context?
Wait, do you want like The one that says they're going
Yeah.
into, they're going to go into Iraq, or like the Shia Crescent specific stuff?
That going into Iraq causes Shia Crescent.
Okay, yeah,
Just
sure.
that evidence.
I'm trying to copy it right now. It's being a little difficult because it's in a Google Doc. Okay. Okay, so I just pasted in Connable, which says that like it would establish the crescent. And then do you want the stuff that says crescent bad?
Yeah, both.
Okay.
And you are pasting new stuff at the bottom of the document, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are y'all prepping now or waiting till all the cards
Okay.
are in?
Cool. I put the
We're-
three cards.
All right, we'll take some prep starting now.
And prep.
Okay. It's going to be frontlining our case, then onto their case. All right, is everyone ready? Okay. Start on Yemen. The first thing he says is that there is a ceasefire in the status quo. That's not true. Jazeera explains that the Houthis have violated the ceasefire 200 times, and what they conclude is that the reason that the current ceasefire is failing is because the Saudi Arabians are not acceding to Houthi demands. We say that if Saudi Arabia has no internal assurance for its own internal security, then they have to limit the extent to the extent of their external military intervention. That's why they have to turn to diplomacy. Then they say that we don't solve arms sales. That is not about the internal stability of the kingdom. The arms sales cannot provide the bases and such that prevent an invasion and make it impossible. Then they say that other actors will keep fighting, but land manager explains that the power sharing scenario necessarily sucks in all other actors that are relevant in the region. Iran, Houthi rebels, which means that other actors are not relevant because they're subsumed by the diplomacy scenario. Then he answers Parsi by saying we pulled out troops. He does not cite a card for saying we pulled out troops. Therefore, as an assertion of fact, it does not exist in the round. Flow Parsi through. It is 100% conceded insofar as he makes a factual assertion with no evidence that caused an 80% decrease in airstrikes as soon as the presence was threatened. Then on the second contention of drones, we concede both pieces of defense. Reaper drones mean we continue as normal, and we have bases in Afghanistan that kept us out of the CIA bases turn because we didn't need the turn of the CIA bases in the first place. Then on Iran, his first response is that the U.S. has no appetite for escalation. He drops the K evidence explaining that post-coronavirus, America has been escalating more because they see it as an opportunity. He also post-states their evidence. It's from April. Then group all three of his new warrants for no escalation. None of them are actually directly responsive to our scenario. Abood from April explains that in the status quo, Iran and the U.S. are escalating now because Iran views that the U.S. has to be pushed out of the region. What's important is that they say that America won't escalate. It doesn't matter insofar as Iran attacks us and we have no other choice whatsoever. The other reason why our evidence is better is because it post-states their evidence by 2 years. At that point, prefer that evidence. Then they read these two turns on sanctions, these two turns on the sanctions impact. First turn, the U.S. only imposes sanctions if Iraq forces withdrawal. Greenwald 2020 explains that amid Soleimani's killing, the U.S. threatened to impose sanctions on Iraq should its government insist on a troop withdrawal. That means choosing to withdraw on our own terms to prevent sanctions. Second turn, U.S. presence creates preconditions for sanctions. Fatabi 2020 explains the U.S. action only amplified voices in Iraqi politics who argue that Americans have to go now. Iran's Iraqi allies will consolidate their influence in the country's politics. Then on the Shia Crescent, two responses. First, Abu 2019 explains that it is not unique. Iran is expanding into Iraq in the status quo. The evidence is specific and it post-states theirs. Again, it's from this April, literally 2 weeks ago. Secondly, they can see the Trevino 13 evidence indicating that Iran is defensive realist. That means if there is not an immediate threat on their doorstep, their foreign policy paradigm means they do not expand. That means the Shia Crescent never is formed. Go to their case. On the first contention of terror, affirming solves better for two reasons. A is anti-American sentiment. For all Gottner 17 explained that the visible and militarized presence of the United States has helped feed the growth of terrorism and anti-American sentiment throughout the Middle East, pulling U.S. troops out of the region will reduce casualties. B is misuse of military equipment. Austin 18. An investigation has shown numerous examples of arms supplied by the U.S. ending up in the hands of militias, including Al-Qaeda and ISIS. But then on the first link about stability, turn the argument. Bossi 13 explains that drone strikes kill civilians. We've abandoned all semblance of accurate targeting. That's important because A, it supercharges the anti-American sentiment. It causes more instability. And B, it also causes more destruction of infrastructure. That's less stability. Then on training, Cordesman 2020 explains that the U.S. abandoned all training because they have viewed it as a failure. On the second contention of nuclearization, two general responses. First, we concede what they say and cross the sanctions don't cripple Iran's ability to nuclearize. However, CNN in 2020 explained that the United Nations released a report saying Iran has developed nuclear-capable ballistic missiles. Iran's stockpile of low-enriched uranium now far exceeds the limit set by the nuclear deal. Second, turn the argument. Affirming solve. Shapiro and Solsky 2016 explains that Iran's main incentive to acquire nuclear weapons is to deter U.S. conventional attacks. The lower U.S. military presence in the region diminishes those fears. On the first link, first, they're warned that if there's no reaction to Iranian expansion, they'll nuclearize. But that assumes that sanctions, NATO presence, Qatari presence, all leaves. There's always that non-unique incentive. But second, you turn it. Iran is more emboldened in their world. Jones 2011 explains that the presence of American military in the Gulf has emboldened them, surrounding Iran militarily, checking hardliners within Tehran, and convinced them the best path to self-preservation is through militarism. On the second link, first, delink them. Tisdale 2020 explains that if we remove troops, we'd reassert Israel with a mutual defense treaty. Israel supporters in Congress would ensure this happens. But then, Israel would never strike because the Chuzadovsky evidence explains that if there is any nuclear strike in the Middle East, it causes massive fallout. That affects Israel too, so they would never strike Iran with nuclear weapons. You ready for cross, or do you need evidence?
Is he still talking?
I think Zane, you cut out for Zane, so can we?
One sec, my screen's restarting.
Yeah, Zane crashed or
hey,
something.
I can send you a speech doc.
You know, I got it.
Oh, you did?
I think Zane crashed or something.
I cut out right after Jones' U.S. presence emboldens.
Oh yeah, okay.
So
So
from Tisdale on down.
Zane, it was Tisdale Mutual Defense Treaty, and then it was nuclear attack in the U.S. or nuclear attack in the Middle East also affects Israel, so they won't do it.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Okay, Zane, are you good?
Is that? Yeah. Okay. Cool.
I wanted to see some evidence. Can I see? Wait, hello?
Yeah.
It froze again. Oh, okay. Can I see CNN? Iran has a nuclear weapon.
Yep.
And then on your case, Iran is expanding in Iraq in the status quo.
Yeah, that's the Abood evidence. Morgan, can you paste that in the doc?
And is it okay if I just look at it during cross?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay.
Morgan, can you paste the boot evidence in though? The first card is already there.
I pasted the evidence.
Okay, you good for cross?
Mhm.
All right, cool. Yeah, I guess I'll just take first question. Okay, so on our argument about sanctions, you read two turns. The first is that like we'll get kicked out, right?
Yeah.
That Trump will impose that. What was the second one?
The second one is that U.S. presence in the region causes a surge in anti-American sentiment among Iran, which strengthens the influence of, within Iraq, and which strengthens the influence of pro-Iran parties, and that's the root cause of why America would sanction Iraq. It's the influence of pro-Iran parties.
Okay, sure. Do you have a question?
Yeah. So let's talk about your impact scenario. So let's just like enter into a hypothetical world in which my uniqueness evidence is correct and Iran is in fact developing nuclear weapons. If that is the case, is there any explanation for why Israel has not preemptively struck?
If Iran has a nuke?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. I guess we'll concede our first warrant isn't true if your nuke evidence is good.
Well, also the second warrant.
Why?
The internal is the same.
I mean, no, it's totally different because we could just say that like U.S. security guarantee solves, right? Like,
yeah, but you don't have evidence that says that. Horowitz just says that hands-off approach means that they respond to Iranian nuclearization differently. Your evidence doesn't say that.
Our second warrant
that's shifting your argument.
Our second warrant is that the United States is like a presence that stabilizes like Israel's fears. Can I get a question?
No, Horowitz does not say that. Horowitz says that in general, a hands-off approach causes Israel to have some fears, but the only evidence that makes the internal link to an Israel strike assumes that Iran does not yet have nuclear weapons, and if they develop them, then the strike occurs.
I mean, yeah,
so again,
like,
the first
disagree.
link is the
Can I get a
internal
question?
link. Okay, sure.
Okay, on your first contention about Yemen, you said that like, you said something. My response was that the UK can like fill in for whatever the United States is doing, and you said that like other actors aren't relevant. Why isn't the UK relevant?
Wait, hold on. Wait, sorry, say that again.
So I read the merit evidence, which says that like the UK provides like similar support that the United States does, and then you said something about like other actors not relevant.
No, right, yeah, because that evidence is primarily talking about like arms sales and low-scale logistical support. What my response is that it's about like basically providing for the internal security of the Saudi regime, which looks like military bases that are ready to deter if an invasion happens tomorrow. It looks like the presence of like, for example, a large like drone infrastructure to carry out attacks. The security infrastructure is more than just some weapons and like maintenance. And stuff.
Also,
that's all the UK does.
Can I get a quick follow-up?
Sure.
Are analytics like fine?
Analytics that make an assertion, no, 100% they're fine, but analytics that make an assertion of fact without citing a card are not fine. You need a card if you're going to say something is factually correct.
If Zayn goes up and reads a card that says troops went up after the Soleimani, or after like the Aramco attack, which is what Parsi is talking about, is that like sufficient?
No, that would be totally unfair, because then why don't I just make my whole rebuttal into a bunch of analytics, and then whatever I want to extend, Morgan will read the actual card. It would save time. That's totally unfair. You can't do that. I think that's time.
All right, we're going to take some prep once I get Zayn on the phone.
Give me 1 sec, Graham.
Okay. Zayn, is it working?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, but wait, Zayn, are you good?
Yo. Oh.
Okay.
Okay.
Start prep now.
Yeah, we're starting prep. That's time.
That was 152. Here's the thing. I had us at 105 views before, right? So 3 left. Cool. Their case first.
Actually, real quick, I want to take those 3 seconds.
1 second
All
to
right,
mute myself.
Okay, yeah, that was our 3 seconds.
Okay, everyone good? Top down their stuff first. Sign post from there.
Sorry, you said you're going down our stuff first.
Yep. Okay, no one is not ready? Cool. On the first contention about Yemen, the Economist evidence is severely mishandled. It says that Saudi Arabia and the status quo want to withdraw from the war because they view that they're losing it and they're using Corona as a fig leaf. Their only response that the ceasefire is failing, that doesn't actually matter. Our evidence takes the ceasefire into account and still says that they want to dip from the region. Next, on the party evidence, you can still carry through the index because the Harvard evidence, which we don't read but we're reading now, says that the US increased troops in October and November. Then you saw the increase in diplomacy. Insofar as that's true, the link is reverse causal. Go to the second contention, it's conceded. This means that we kick out of the turn on our case when they talk about drone strikes. Go to the third contention. Very briefly, start by extending a couple of the pieces of defense Grant reads. The first thing we say is that none of the attacks that the United States are doing in the status quo are lethal. This means that at the very best, you can doubt their link on probability. Secondly, extend the Harvard evidence, which said that even if we do use lethal force, this is actually a good thing because it can do things like create a red line and actually decrease tensions and decrease the probability of war. Once again, 2 conceded pieces of defense. The post-date doesn't actually matter because these are very general responses. Next, they extend the tribunal evidence saying that right now Iran is only like a defensive actor and attacks against the US as a result. However, they've conceded the McKenzie evidence on their second warrant about diplomacy. What McKenzie finds is that Iran would only do things like negotiate and step down tensions if the United States withdraws sanctions. Unfortunately, he also concludes that sanctions are never going to get withdrawn on Iran, and therefore Iran will always be aggressive. Their link is triggered regardless. Go to the turn. The Denver evidence is conceded, which says that if that Iran and the status quo needs Iraq for its economic survival, this means that it went. The middle evidence says that in the status quo, the United States is deterring Iran from becoming increasingly aggressive, and Jihad says that when the United States withdraws its troops, therefore Iran would gain more political control. 2 implications: A, the United States war hawks would view Iraq the same way that they view Iraq and view Iraq the same way that they view Iran and therefore have sanctions on them, killing 220,000 people. Let's do a couple of front lines of that. The first response I give is that the if they kick out the United States, like withdrawal is really bad. Omar frontlines this by telling you that Iraq would never actually kick them out because they fear sanctions in the first place. The second turn they give is about sentiment, but insofar as there's no anti-American protest in the status quo since February, that turn doesn't apply. Go to the second implication. The second implication is about the Sunni Shia crescent. What it finds that right now in the status quo, Iran's trying to become increasingly aggressive in Iraq in order to expand the Shia crescent, which would lead to cascading Sunni Shia conflicts as all the Sunni countries believe that they're being encroached upon by Iran. The historical precedent is that the 8 years old war killed 1 million people, and the prerequisite analysis is also conceded in Jack's rebuttal. What it says is that in the status quo, if the Sunni Shia crescent were to happen, you see cascading conflicts throughout the entirety of the Middle East, which definitely preempts their case because then Iran would get involved. They say 2 things in response. First, they say that Iran's expanding in the status quo. That's not true. The middle evidence is conceded in rebuttal, which is that right now the United States is deterring. The second thing they say is a tribunal evidence saying that they're defensive. But again, McKenzie frontlines this by telling you that in the quo, like Iran will always be aggressive if the US is there, and sanctions do that. Go to the second. The first contention doesn't matter. Terror is low impact. Go to the second contention. We concede nuclearization. Sanctions definitely stop them from doing that. That kicks out of Iran being aggressive because of the Jones evidence, because they're always being encroached upon. On the second word about abandonment, they give you the Tisdale response about the mutual defense treaty. This doesn't actually matter because the US is never going to, Israel's never going to sign over its military to the United States if they feel abandoned. So, the second thing they say is that Israel won't nuke because they'll get attacked. We concede, therefore the Tisdale turn doesn't matter in the first place. Oh, the reason that Israel feels abandoned because Horowitz finds the concern in Israel that America's hands-off approach in the Middle East is going to lead to Iran attacking Israel.
All right, we're going to need a few cards. First, can I see that we're doing exclusively like non-lethal attacks in Iraq?
Yeah, sure.
And then also the middle evidence about the US deterring in the status quo, and then the McKenzie evidence too.
I just put in Cooper. Cooper says that like we responded to like 2 servicemen being killed by like non-lethal attack. The other one you wanted.
Is it a card or is it a link?
It's a card, but I mean the card's pretty big. I can give you the link too if you want, I guess.
Oh.
It's like
What's the date? What's the month?
Here. It's pretty recent. I'll just give you the link. I just put in, I'm getting the link now. It just takes a while. But I put in the other thing that says the like Mackenzie evidence and the other piece of evidence that says like Iran won't come to the table without sanctions. And then the piece of evidence that says Trump will never not do that.
Wait, I'm so confused, to be honest. What are these cards? Can you highlight the like text that you're referencing? Because this says this is my tag written like 6 times in it. I don't know, like
Don't tag
I'm kind
my
of
evidence
confused
very
about
well.
what the
Yeah, so I'll just write the tag.
Where's the no, yeah. Where is the actual I don't really care about like the actual tag. I'm just
it.
Okay, cool.
Okay, wait, what was the other piece of evidence you wanted?
Which ones are actually in there?
Okay, so the one that says we just like attacked the military depot and avoided casualties is in there.
Wait.
And then like the one that says US is avoiding casualties. And like
Is
lethal
that
retaliation.
the first one, the long one?
Yeah, that's the
Oh
long
yeah,
one.
what was the date on that again?
March, I think.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Then what's the second card?
The second card says that Trump's not going to lift sanctions as a precondition for the meeting. And then the Mackenzie evidence, which is the card after, says that that lifting sanctions is a precondition for any negotiations with Iran.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Anything else?
All right,
or is that good? Cool.
That's fine. Morgan, I don't know if you can hear me. If you want to call me, we'll start prep. All right, starting prep now. Wait, hold on.
Is that time?
Okay, that's time. That's all I wrote.
Okay. I'm gonna do. It's gonna start at the top. It's gonna go top down their case, like briefly, and then it's gonna go onto the Iran scenario. And then when I'm on the Iran scenario, that's when I'm gonna do all the term answers, or the answers to the term. Does that make sense?
Sorry, where are you starting?
Your case. First contention.
Hawken's case, yeah.
All right. Is everyone ready? They concede the first terror turn was a terrible idea. The terror turn says that the United States presence in the region leads to anti-American sentiment, which is the main reason that ISIS is able to recruit members and ISIS is able to expand. Our evidence indicates that anti-American sentiment in the region is literally the single root cause to terror and outweighs any sort of United States presence, which is physically shutting them down, which is literally putting a band-aid on a bullet hole in case they try to extend through ink to answer this, but they shouldn't because they literally dropped it. You can weigh it in two ways. First, the strength of link. This is 100% conceded. It's going to be really messy on the turn that they go for on our Iran case. Like they've already made it really messy. This is really a really clear place to vote. But second is on a prerequisite. They tell you in Grand Crossfire that ISIS resurgence and terrorism controls the internal link to stability in the region. So far as ISIS capitalizes and ISIS attacks weaken the strength of governments, including the governments in Iraq and anyone else where the Shia crescent would be, and cause mass civilian deaths and conflict. So far as terrorism is the root cause, is the root cause and controls the internal link into destabilizing Iraq. That means at best for them in their turn scenario, the turn about the Shia crescent and conflict in Iraq is not unique because conflict breaks out because of terrorism. Let's on the bottom briefly in case they go for Israel. The TISL evidence says U.S. does a defense treaty. Their front line has no warrant and no card. The U.S. is not going to abandon Israel. Let's go to our case. Extend the Iran link. The Abido evidence is really clear. It says that there is a binary right now. Iran will do everything they can to expel the United States troop presence from Iraq. It says that either the U.S. removes troops right now, or there's literally a war that breaks out in Iraq that expands to a U.S.-Iran war. The Chustovsky evidence says that causes nuclear fallout and kills millions. Look at their responses first. They say that the current strikes are not lethal. One, we post-date them. These strikes now are lethal. But second of all, that was literally only one strike and it's empiric. If you look like holistically, we actually prove it. Next, they say that the lethal force decreases tension in the United States. One, it's not going to decrease tension as far as Iran sees it as an existential threat, and clearly Iran does not see lethal force as a deterrent because Iran is the one that is lashing out right now on the turn, on all of the turn stuff. Okay. First, on the sanction thing, they really, really mishandled the anti-American sentiment argument. We tell you that anti-American sentiment is never going to go away, or no. Anti-American sentiment actually goes away in our world, and that is the reason that there are hawks and there are going to be sanctions. They respond by saying that there are no protests now. That was not a very good front line. A, there clearly are protests now, but B, there doesn't need to be protests so far as there are elections happening in the status quo. That means that we solve for the root cause of all of these issues by getting rid of anti-American sentiment. Next, on the idea about the Shia crescent, they really mishandled this. The Abido evidence is really, really clear. It says that Iran is expanding into Iraq literally in the status quo. They respond by saying that the U.S. is deterring. We totally post-date them. Also, our evidence proves uniqueness that is conceded that says that we are escalating right now. Prefer the literally most recent evidence is from literally April. Next, the Trevino evidence is really important. It says that Iran is a defensive realist, means they're not going to expand. Also, on the negotiations argument saying that they're never going to negotiate because of sanctions. First of all, you can't be expansionist and still not negotiate. But second of all, our Trevino evidence says that they still won't expand even if they don't negotiate. You cannot negotiate and still not expand, which is why they are not mutually exclusive. At that point, war between U.S. and Iran is much bigger because the U.S. has military capabilities and any sort of proxy war in the Shia crescent, which is the only impact of their summary.
Y'all ready for Grand? Morgan, actually,
yeah, we're good.
Y'all good? Okay. Y'all gonna have the first question since you go first.
Cool.
phone?
Let's talk about terrorism,
Zane,
I guess.
mute your phone.
Oh,
Mute your phone.
Is that better, Grant?
Yeah.
Resetting.
Cool.
3 minutes when y'all are ready.
All right. Let's talk about terror. Is terrorism going up or is it going down in the status quo?
You don't extend uniqueness through summary, so there is no assessment the judge can make of uniqueness.
Our evidence, first of all, says
it's scalar.
It says that A is scalar. B says
everything's
that
scalar.
Even if terrorism is down in the status quo, that doesn't mean that it's going to stay down. Third, we say that even if that's true, we solve for terrorism long into the future because the U.S. and American sentiment is the
sure.
cause.
So
the root
anti-
cause, like,
But
So
I'd actually like
anti-Americans-
to ask a question because y'all.
Well, I asked. You guys were talking for the last.
You straight up conceded this in summary. How do you think?
No. I said. I'm not. No. It's the same response. I'm saying the impact is small because the uniqueness is very tiny. So, for example, the impact card read is really, really bad. The reason is because it says 1.6 million Iraqis are displaced currently, but last year 2 million got replaced. So for example,
two
because
things.
it's like
Two things.
Sure.
Wait, Morgan, hold on. So
Yeah.
two things. Firstly, you don't give a bad uniqueness as the reason for the impact being small. There's no warrant for why the impact is small. Second, you don't have an indicted tier 1 evidence in summary, even if that wasn't sketchy. So functionally, you just give us the door wide open to just take your impact.
And third of all, the impact that we extend to terrorism is not the displacement card. We don't extend displacement. The impact that we extend is destabilizing the government in Iraq.
Sure.
Which you tell me happens.
Yeah, but how can you? But you don't.
But, hey, we spent a long time on this. I have a question I'd like to ask.
Sure.
So let's talk about the sanctions scenario. Your front line, in summary, was if there are protests, anti-American sentiment doesn't matter.
No, there aren't.
Right? So does anti-American sentiment
protests.
influence the composition of the government?
It's possible I misspoke or there was like mishearing or something, but my front line was there hasn't been anti-American protests since February.
No, yeah, I heard you. What I'm saying is that even if there aren't protests, there are elections, and elections determine who constitutes the Iraqi government, and if it's pro-Iran, America sanctions. So anti-American sentiment makes the government pro-Iran, causes sanctions, triggers your impact. That's why you're not
If there's
responsible.
so much anti-American sentiment within Iraq, how come no one's protesting the United States, but everyone's protesting the government who can't help them economically?
First of all, they are. Second of all, they should have been.
No, they're not. No, I did. I said that there are no anti-American protests in the SQO. If there is political support, you probably see
that
some
sentiment doesn't exist.
You don't need so much. First of all, what was I going to say? Protests are not the litmus test for anti-American sentiment. You don't.
Protests are the litmus test for most political revolutions. If you're going to say that there's going to be a huge change in Iraqi geopolitics.
Please, can I finish? Then the second point is that you don't need so much anti-American sentiment to trigger protests. You only need enough anti-American sentiment for them to elect the hardliners into the government. Then once the hardliners get elected, regardless of whether or not protest happens, that is when you trigger the turn that we're talking about. Right?
Quick question.
Protests, the absence of protests does not prove that hardliners in Iraq are not going to lose the election. That's ridiculous. That's time.
Okay.
I'm the terror free rec.
We have no prep, so. It'll be terror, and then US, Iran, wherever you have their second contention flowed, and all of those shenanigans. Okay, is everyone good? Okay. Briefly on terrorism, they read the Bozzi evidence drone strikes cause anti-American sentiment. That's bad for them because remember, Zane tells you this turn's non-unique because the drones happen anyway based on the concessions on their C2. You don't give them any offense on terrorism. That's in summary too. Go to their C3 where we're winning on the turn. On their offense specifically, the easiest place to vote is on the hard evidence. The hard evidence says that it's possible to have lethal retaliation, but as long as you have some red line that shows where Iran can and cannot cross, it lowers tensions. The reason that's important is because the evidence says historically this has worked with killings in killing Soleimani, and also when attacking Syria. That's really important because this means that even if you buy that the United States retaliates in lethal fashion, it doesn't matter. There's no escalation that actually happens. But then secondly, they never really interact with the evidence that says right now the most recent attack. They say their evidence post dates, but it doesn't. Our evidence is pretty good in saying the most recent retaliation the United States has done was on a malicious depot at night purposely to avoid casualties. Clearly the United States has no interest in escalating. The Cooper evidence is really, really clear on that. There's no appetite for war. At that point, you extend our turn. Denver finds that right now Iran needs Iraq in order to escape sanctions in order to connect themselves to the Assad regime and Hezbollah. But Middle finds that right now U.S. influence in Iraq counters Iranian influence and prevents them from gaining total control. But the jihad evidence finds that as soon as U.S. troops withdraw, the opposite happens and Iran gets control of Iran gets control of Iraq. That's bad for two reasons. The first is sanctions. Jihad says that this triggers American hawks to treat Iraq as an enemy. It causes sanctions. That kills 227,000 people. They say two things. First, they say that like we're withdrawing on our own terms, but again, Omar frontlines this because Omar finds that Iraq will never kick us out. They fear sanctions. The second thing is like this anti-American support. But remember, Zayn tells you like the main way people like show support is through protest, but there's literally no protest against America right now. Then the second impact is the Shia Crescent. What we tell you is that it allows for the Shia Crescent, which the Wadley evidence says increases Sunni Shia tensions, which causes like more war. That their only responses are like Iran's expanding now. Middle says it's not true, and then secondly, the Denver evidence is better than their defensive realist evidence. It's that weighs in two ways. One, sanctions killed 227,000. It destabilizes Iraq. It also links into terrorism. But then secondly, the conceded the conceded analysis that the Shia Crescent causes increase in tensions, causes increase in conflict, brings in the United States, triggers all of their links. Shia Crescent makes at worst their argument non-unique.
Do we have any prep left?
No.
Right. Jack, just make sure you see your text.
All right. So the order is going to be. Wait, here, I need to arrange my papers for a second. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So yeah, it's going to be their case, the weighing on the terror terms, then just the debate on our case. All right, is everyone ready? All right. Extend the turn. The Thrall and Gopner evidence, the extension Morgan makes in summary, not the Bossie evidence, explains that U.S. regional military presence is the root cause of anti-American sentiment. Presence in the region makes civilians go against the U.S., and it is the reason why terror exists in the region. The evidence is fantastic. It says it is the root cause of regional terror. The only response they make, because they totally like blew it in summary, is that, well, we conceded the Bossie drone strikes thing, so drone strikes don't happen. Yeah, drone strikes are a cause of anti-American sentiment, but that doesn't mean that the turn that just says presence in general doesn't also trigger anti-American sentiment. At that point, we get 100% access to the weighing, which is conceded, and it ends the round. You don't even need to look at the other flow. The first is the strength of link. There's a lot of condensation on the other flow. Morgan tells you the stronger link, vote there. He shows you how to make the decision, and they drop it. The second prereq is that we are a prerequisite to all the impact scenarios on their case. Regional war, instability. We say that when you proliferate terror across the entire region, new groups come in, infighting happens. Prefer this to their 3-second blip saying they link it to terror in final focus because A, it was later than Morgan's weighing, and B, it literally was not warranted at all. Also, their last piece of weighing they extended was over time. Ignore it. On our case. Extend the link, it's very clear. Rebuttal 2020 explains with the link that Iran has recently expanded as of March that it needs to force U.S. out. This is an existential choice. Iran is funding militias right now that are fighting with America, and Tuesday explains that sucking America in, we will have to escalate with nukes, which kills millions and wipes out half the Middle East. They extend basically like two functional responses. First, I guess group the first two responses. They say basically it's just deterrence and no escalation now. Abudo from April explains, yes, there is escalation now. He literally says Iranian militias are fighting us right now. We post it and we're from April. And also their evidence is about one strike. They dropped that in there from Morgan too. But then group both of the sanctions and also the Shia Crescent scenario. If Abudo is true and Iran is fighting militias in Iraq, it non-uniques both of these arguments. But then on the first thing, extend anti-American sentiment triggers sanctions. They just say that no protest, but if you make a country anti-America, that changes elections. And then on the Shia Crescent, they drop Tisdall, which explains Iran is a defensive realist, which means if we pull out, they never expand. That's terminal defense on Shia Crescent. It's cold conceded.
Good round.
Yeah, good round.
Just let me know if you guys need to see any evidence from us.
Myself from that page, so I'm just on my individual ballot. So one of you just refresh it, it should work.
Like I'm hitting refresh and it says it's incomplete.
All right, so Cayman still has to
Let me refresh.
Wait, so have all of us submitted or is somebody still working?
I think we've all submitted.
I am seeing it.
Okay, now I see it.
Perfect.
Let me do the quick summon them thing.
Yeah, Cayman, you read it off when you're ready.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're all here.
All right. Congratulations to both teams on making it to the semifinals of the first ever ETOC. The decision is a 2-1 for the pro team from Blake. As the squirrel, I believe I talk first. Okay, so I think that both teams had some easy ways out this round. I'm going to start at the top and work my way through really quickly. I think that there's definitely a risk of increased anti-American sentiment from presence compared to drone strikes, but I don't think the drone strikes gets answered in 3 speeches, both in terms of the range can come from outside of the Middle East, and drone strikes will continue. I also don't think that there's ever anything extended beyond constructive from Blake that implies that anti-American sentiment is reverse causal. That is that withdrawal solves anti-American sentiment, and people whose families were killed by American troops, for instance, suddenly stop disliking America. At that point, I grant Hawken a lot of defense on that. I think that even if presence in the region is the root cause of regional terror, I don't think that card specifically says bases in the region, and I don't think that is ever anything done in the round to differentiate the military presence from the influence of these potentially ongoing strikes, which neither side is really saying go away. That means that I look from there down to the diversionary war with Iran argument. On the diversionary war argument, there's a couple things that complicate this. And I think that from a truthiness standpoint, Blake is way ahead here. I think there's a potential contradiction that Hawken is making, but Blake is not pointing out. I think that Hawken is actually not reading 2 pieces of defense here. I think what Hawken is doing is probably closer to a double turn a little bit. Because on the one hand, y'all are reading, let me make sure that I am getting the 2 cards right as far as which is which. On the one hand, y'all are reading the heart card, which suggests that because Iran didn't react with all-out war to the Soleimani killing, that we should keep using lethal force and kill Iranian leaders one at a time as punishment for crossing red lines until the regime crumbles. Then you're also reading a card that says we should just target depots and avoid lethal force, and that also solves. And I think that this just gets treated as if it is defense in the round, and it should not be. I think that Blake can honestly concede one of these and kind of put Hawken in an awful spot here. But I think that Blake's right that it's a false choice. Iran cannot negotiate and not expand. I just don't think that actually matters, because even if one side is winning that Iran is defensive realists and they won't be the first one to strike, and the other side is winning the U.S.'s current policy is going to be limited war, and they're not going to strike first, and neither side will escalate into all-out war unless somebody cross-supplies the stuff from the Israel flow elsewhere in the round. At this point, I think that both teams could go back to the kind of messy in-depth debate on Parsi and just win the direction of the link here fairly easily with diplomacy. That would mean I have to do a lot less work in the round. For Blake, I would be careful about doing what you did with that this round in finals. I don't think that it's a great strategy in front of any panel. And the reason for that is they make a claim of fact in their speech. You say you didn't read a card that the fact is true. They say in the next speech, here's a card that the fact is true. And honestly, I would have voted a lot more quickly if Hawken had pushed this a little bit more, I think, because it's like if one team says in summary, there's going to be a land invasion of Bahrain, and the other team says Bahrain is an island, and they say, well, you didn't read a card saying Bahrain is an island in the previous speech. It is just a question of fact. And this is kind of the same thing, because one of 3 things is true. Either Parsi is clueless and doesn't know this happened, or Parsi is conveniently omitting this to further their agenda, or Parsi honestly believes that the diplomacy happened in spite of the U.S. deployment to Saudi Arabia, not because of it. But saying this is a new fact, which you told me, but you didn't read a card for the fact, so it's abusive to say the fact, is not super persuasive to me. I think that that's certainly a place that either team could have clarified, because I think whoever wins diplomacy probably can do a little bit more to cross-play to the diversionary war. So for me, a lot of the big impacts are either heavily mitigated or taken out. Speaking of taking out impacts, I am not entirely sure why Hawken is doing what they're doing in Grand Cross with their own impact, but when you say that our impact card is really bad, 4 million versus 1.6 million, like, I'm not sure that it is abusive because you're not actually indicting it. You're literally just saying that the number is smaller than the other number. But I don't think you want to phrase it as it's bad. I think that's what confuses things a little bit there. So at that point, neither team really deals with that in Final Focus. So, and I think a big part of this is just that both teams are out of prep time here and have to make snap decisions in the round that make it harder for either to advance the narrative they would want to advance if they had more time or were redoing speeches or something like that. I'm also a little surprised that nobody does anything with the CNN card that says Iran has nuclear capability already. I think that that completely takes out one side's narrative on what Iran's intentions are and how the US doctrine can actually work if it's cross-applied to the flow that both teams are putting a lot of ink on. For future rounds, again, the card doesn't say what it's being tagged to say in the round. It says that Iran has ballistic missiles that are capable of holding nuclear warheads. It does not say they have nuclear warheads. It just says they developed the missiles that would be capable of carrying them, which, yes, they have a space program, which is how we know that. And at the end of the day, the evidence that I feel I have to do the least work on, the impact that I feel I have to do the least work on to extend is the jihad evidence, which means that I think that Khan is slightly winning the narrative on sanctions here. I think that Pro can definitely beat this if they extend in their Final Focus the idea that leaving is probably inevitable. It is simply a question of whether we leave on our own terms or are forced out. I think that that would definitely have made this a Pro ballot for me. Absent that, I think it is a marginal reason to vote Khan in a round where there is a lot of defense on both sides and a lot of decision-making in Final Focus that both teams would have done differently if they had had prep time left.
Okay. Josh, do you want to go or do you want me to go?
I don't mind. You can go next.
Okay. Honestly, for this round, I think my decision is pretty straightforward. On the NC, in rebuttal, I have two responses that are like really the highlight at the end of the round that are made by the AF. The first is that physical US military presence causes anti-American sentiment, and drone strikes, which are inaccurate and kill civilians, increase anti-American sentiment. For Hawken, you just go about conceding the responses made on Blake's contention 2 and try and use that to cross-apply to take out the turns on drones, which I think is a smart strategy. The problem is I think Blake is right that you're not interacting with the other argument, which is that physical US military presence actually increases anti-American sentiment. You don't contest this anywhere in the round up until like the very end. And even then, I don't think you're very responsive because you're still only talking about drone strike sentiment at that point and not really about the impact of physical US military presence. At that point, I think that regardless of what distinguishments are made and like how great of a strength of link in reality is like there's distinction between like drone inaccuracy and physical military boots on the ground, that it's conceded. I buy that physical military like troops increase anti-American sentiment, and that's really bad because we feel like more terrorist groups, more recruitment. And then I think the key for me here is the only comparative weighing done in the round between this turn and the terrorism issue and the turn impact that Hawken tries to go for is done by Blake, that says that this terrorism issue links in to, and causes the Shiite crescent argument, because when you have more terrorists, you have more instability and therefore lead to more regional issues inside the Middle East. This is conceded. On the AF, first of all, on the Iran offense that the AF tries to go for, I think that there needs to be a little bit more war contextualization and comparison between the two teams. Blake tells me that Iran is purely defensive. Hawken tells me that Iran has an incentive to expand like economically to relate ties with other nations. Like, which one of these things is true? Which one of these things should I prefer? That work's not done. If I really want to try and resolve something here, I think the only piece of evidence comparison that is specifically unique is done by Blake, which is like the indict that Hawken, your example, is only talking about one specific instance. It isn't holistic of the entire scenario. But even then, I don't think that Blake is doing enough work on the impact level and Final Focus on this argument for me to vote on it. So I'm really not going to consider it. On the turns, for one, I think the election debate is like a little messy in terms of like clarity of like what is like really constitutes American sentiment in Iraq in terms of like protests or elections, I think this issue just becomes a matter of just like, at the end of the round, it's really messy. If I want to vote here, it's like, which side do I want to believe more? Because I don't think that either side is really doing the work to prove their point here. And then in Blake final, you make this argument that's like, our Abno card, if you believe it, it also non-unique the issues here. It's also super uncontextualized. I really don't know what the warranting for why it's applicable. I really don't buy it. I think that there's a potential argument to be made that, like, yes, Hawken is like possibly conceding this argument about like Iran is defensive on the turn at the bottom, which is like what the final tries to say. It's like, oh, they can see that it's defensive, which means that this stuff just never happens, which is like then goes back to the debate at the top, which is like, well, they say that Iran has an incentive to expand economically, and it's then again the same issue because it's the same argument that you're just applying to multiple places. It's just like, which side do I believe? And I think that here, even if I do give credence to Hawken in terms of like there is some offense on the Shiite crescent argument, the only like warranted developed weighing that Hawken does for me is the prereq analysis on the Iran argument that if we have a Shiite crescent, like that increases instability in the Middle East, that'll draw on all the Iran issues the app talks about. That's like nowhere in the round do I get comparison to the terrorism turn issue that Blake goes for. Like there is a small blip that I get that it's like this somehow links into terrorism. It's not developed or warranted whatsoever, so I'm not inclined to buy it, which means that at the end of the round, I honestly just think that this terrorism thing just gets blown like out of proportion in context because it is like conceded and it is outweighing like all the turn offense that Hawken's going for, which for me makes for a pretty clean half ballot.
I'm so happy I let you go first because you just saved me a ton of time. I'll keep mine relatively quick because my decision is very similar, I think, in a lot of ways. I think, yeah, terrorism definitely just got blown out of the water on this debate. I think that the rebuttal just didn't cover frontlining their case well enough, and that unfortunately, like I didn't see it turning out this way either. I didn't think terrorism was going to be like a terrorism term was going to be the thing that Blake was going to collapse on. But I do think that the fact that it's conceded and I'm buying this warrant, like I think the difference I'm getting between like analyzing this argument versus the other judges is I'm seeing the argument more so as like U.S. presence is uniquely the root cause of why terrorism exists in the region. And that narrative doesn't get lost to me. I get that in the very beginning in the rebuttal that anti-American sentiment is because of the visible U.S. presence that exists. And you're extending that narrative pretty cleanly throughout the round. And then on top of that, I do think that the weighing that's 100% conceded coming even out of the final focus makes it almost impossible to vote for the negative, even if you are winning any of your offense, because I do think they're winning just a stronger, more clear link into terrorism and a reason as to why it's a prerequisite and why that magnifies all the impacts that you're collapsing on. But then just because I did analyze the Iran-US debate too, and I think that it gets a little bit more messy here. I think that the negative is winning some offense, but I don't think it's enough to obviously to outweigh terrorism. But here's kind of how I evaluated it. So on sanctions, like I did understand Blake's argument and defense too when they say that like Iran is funding militias right now, and there's no real like evidence comparison happening here on behalf of the neg for this argument. And for me, it plays a bigger role in my decision on this argument because to me it makes it seem that it's not unique, right? And I believe that analysis that Blake's given me when he says that like things like sanctions and the Shia crescent arguments are all non-unique. We should already see those things happen. If your internal link to that is that Iran is already acting up aggressively, and I don't think there's any like solid defense extended in the last speech to really convince me that they're not expanding right now, besides the same extension of the response you're making about Iran having this defensive posture instead of expansionist, which I don't think like answers back well enough based on their empirics that they're extending. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I'm missing that Sam didn't already say. But yeah, that was basically my decision. If you have specific questions, you can reach out to me or ask any one of us if you have a question. But it was a good debate.
One last thing for y'all.
Good round.
Normally at TOC, brick and mortar TOC, what ends up happening is it's somebody's last round. After the round, you go, you sit with your teammates, your coaches, your friends from the circuit, you decompress. It sucks that that part of the experience is not something that we can have this year. But all y'all did great, and all y'all are so much better than you were when I judged you 3.5 years ago. Watching all 4 of you improve over the course of your careers has been a privilege, and I wish that you could spend this time either getting ready for the final round or reflecting on your TOC in the space with your teammates, with your friends from the circuits, with the coaches. And it sucks that you can't, but all of y'all are great.